Welcome to the Mappedin Speaker Series. We have so much information available to us about the outdoors, but how much of that makes it indoors with us? How do our needs dictate how a space evolves? On this episode of the Speaker Series, we're talking to Patrick Flanagan, the SVP of Digital Marketing and Strategy at Simon Property Group.
Let's get into it. I think it'll be a fun discussion.
Sounds good. So actually, the first thing I wanted to talk about with you today, I know that you're an avid photographer. I mean, anyone can go to your Instagram NARPOL. I will actually have a question on that later around what does NARPOL mean. But
oh boy,
I'm potentially opening up a can of worms there. But one of the things that I really admire about at least the way that you do take your photographs is your attention to detail. And, you know, I see through all of the kinds of photos that you take, there are much more nature-based architecture. And you get to like the really, really granular level where, you know, you're taking photos of like, you know, wooden slats in a wall, or you're taking photos of, you know, some sort of geometry that's on a tile. And you have that ability to look very, very, you know, closely into things. I wonder, like, how do you see the world in terms of, you know, like looking back from the macro level, but then also trying to find the beauty at that micro level as well?
Well, the micro level comes to me probably just from an obsession with patterns, just always and trying to make sense of the complexity. So I think increasingly maybe I've just stared at one too many graph or data set, but just a pattern inherent in everything. So, you know, looking how a backside of a fern unravels and all the different spores that might be on it, or, you know, looking at the underside of a mushroom and how it's an ultra complex structure that's actually been formed.
Right.
Those are just fascinating to me, that level of engineering exists in the natural world. And certainly at a macro level, probably about the other half of my photos are really trying to capture the widest possible lens that I can throw through my phone. It never does it justice, but trying to always make sure I'm looking up, right? So guilty at times, right, of being very narrow-minded, literally from the quintessential walking around, you know, a beautiful city with my face buried in a phone, or, you know, just being, you know, ultra-focused at work and the rest of it just kind of ignoring and dropping out. But these are kind of reminders to me that, you know, to always look up, that proverbial moment of, you know, what's around you, take it in, enjoy the moment. So it's my silly, very amateur attempts to capture those two extremes of the beauty and the detail and the grandeur at the larger picture level.
Right. No. And I think, you know, one of the things that I always notice is that obviously if anyone does follow you, like I will plug your Instagram for you, NARPOL, anyone who's listening should go follow him. The outdoor nature of all of your photos is obviously very apparent, you know, passionate about these sort of outdoor areas and outdoor photography. I'm wondering, you know, potentially a loaded question, but how do you internalize that outdoor nature and the complexity of that design, and then internalize, you know, how you push that natural phenomenon into the way that you think about digital, and how you want to sort of replicate those larger, complex nature structures into something like a website?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been listening to other podcasts and talks on like biomimicry, and it's very much, you know, whether that's the exact all-encompassing concept for this, but it certainly is part of it, the thought process of looking at how really complex things can be reduced to simple moments. I think we make in the digital world, oftentimes hiding complexity. You know, it's an easy thing to try to discount someone's ability to understand something. Oh, you won't understand. It's technical. It involves all you need to throw in 3 or 4 big words. You can almost scare people away from actually engaging. I think the opposite is what we need to be doing, right? I didn't go to school for exactly what I did. Most of it was learned and acquired knowledge through practicing and doing. And And I think anyone is more than able to understand. I think that's a big part of just, break it down, like much like you can break down the natural world into a series of components and subcomponents and processes and it's a very similar thing. So the more complex it is, and the more, it makes your head hurt, try to apply some level of framing that, sketching to just start at the highest end, and then you can get to the details late, as you proverbially, zoom in on the concept or the framework. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but that's really one of the things I've taken away, of what you can learn. And then certainly on the other side of applying the processes that you see in nature to, what we do. I mean, something as simple as, just thinking through, on mammals that live underwater. I know it's kind of a strange concept, but at a very simplistic level, their basic biorhythm is one of holding their breath, fundamentally, right? So
right.
A active period, and then kind of a recovery as they come up, get air, in a sense, regenerate, get gear up for their next, 2 to 5, 10, 20 minutes of underwater time, what they need to accomplish. That rhythm, I think we try to replicate, through sprint patterns with agile development, or with, the story arcs of, our overall epic development life cycles. But, so whether it's, how you train for a marathon, or, a century bike ride, or how you're thinking of how to tackle a huge, huge project, there's just so many patterns, and that's just one of many, 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 but that, I'm always constantly reminded of the similarities.
Yeah. And I think what you do a very good job of, just working with you for the last 2 years, is, when we're talking about other digital experiences, you are always falling back to, how is the user actually interacting with these things? And I think maybe even unintentionally, or, maybe unconscious of it, I always found it interesting that the way you viewed technology and how the user was interacting with it, it was always like you were searching for, the simplicity of, somebody who knows how to, interact with nature. It's so simple in that it is also so complex in the underbelly. But at the end of the day, humans know and are innately aware of exactly, how to touch dirt, or play with, a pile of leaves when they're all falling down. There is always that playful component, but also just that understanding of nature. I feel like, you want that same sort of reactivity or conscious awareness that a person picking up a mobile device and interacting with one of the products you're responsible for has that same sort of familiarity with exactly what you're trying and encouraging them to do from a behavior standpoint.
Tapping into those heuristics that are, whether they're inherent and formed, in the early stages, or formed from our previous experiences with interacting with other software and in interfaces and applications, I think is so critical that it does just have that inherent natural feel to it. So the less you can have to teach a new idea, a new framework, a new concept, a new layout, the more of, I think I've seen this. I'm pretty sure I have a starting point, at least, of what I should do as a user. Is such I think, a powerful thing. I mean, there's very few companies and opportunities that you really get to have a chance to introduce something brand thinking new. And for a lot of us, it's leveraging what's already been essentially taught or institutionalized. And I think sometimes we go, it has to be new and fresh, and we should be recreating the wheel every time, because that's what innovation is. And I think there's other ways to be innovative other than, wreaking, havoc on forcing, users to relearn what is already a well understood, well practiced task, right? And there was I'll try to find the link to it, a developer UX UI developer challenge of trying to improve upon the volume slider control. So something that's really, really basic, right? From 0 to 100, oftentimes this little line and a dot, and it's very intuitive. And they all, hundreds of developers, submitted ideas, and it wasn't, I think, one, and that was actually one of the big things, was it didn't need to be improved, It was all just change for change's sake, actually only making users' life more difficult if any of these other alternate ideas would be adopted. Because as much as they wanted to try to find a new, better way, that's a pretty good answer.
Right.
Tires have been around for a long time. No one's found a better way. We've just kind of now rest on that as a foundational piece. It's not being lazy and resting in our laurels. That's just the best answer we currently have, so.
Right. And I think as well, like as part of that, one of the things that I'm abundantly aware of working with you is that, there is such a variety of, inputs that a customer or a shopper can actually have with the company that is, trying to cater and curate that digital experience for them. So one of the things that, I know obviously you're very passionate about is the data side of things and making sure that obviously there's the design UX component, but you really do want to leverage data for a lot of those decisions and trying to understand how do all of those different pieces actually impact the way people are interacting with those, digital experiences. I'm wondering on that data front, how much of it do you sort of rest on versus like, again, understanding, your background with like loving nature and the outdoors and, just that complex nature of things as it relates to, something that is intrinsic. How do you balance like that more subjective side of design versus the more objective side of, the data that you're collecting?
So I think over time, I've become, I hope, more balanced in accepting that intuition, past experiences, competitive landscape reviews have value and input, and that it cannot be solely a data-driven, very cold, black and white decision-making process. I think early on as a product manager in my career, I was probably leaned much heavier there. And maybe I work for a chief creative officer in my current role, and he's, I think, much more of an artist and an intuitive spirit at heart, and appreciating the blend of art and science increasingly has been, I think, a good balance point for the work. And we've seen, at least I've been able to see results that back it up as well, right? So we kind of can see the data only decision, would have produced X, the gut, so to speak, in decision would have produced Y, and then the blended version produced something altogether better than either option. So I think we as digital professionals have to do much more of a blended model than these pure isolated, academic, views of it's not just a big math equation.
Right. And I mean, that's a good segue into, something else I wanted to chat about with you. So the prop tech space is obviously something that is, heating up. It has been heating up for the last couple of years, but even more so now. I'm wondering, what you're seeing in the market. Are you seeing prop tech companies really base their value prop on that data side and sort of sacrificing more of that intuition side? Or, are you seeing a good balance when you're seeing these up and coming startups?
Zoran, could you, for the listener, maybe define how you think about prop tech? I just want to make sure everyone has a common understanding of that kind of class of industry and company.
For sure. Absolutely. So yeah, I'm defining prop tech as a technology that enables where people live, work, shop, and play. And that enablement is through something that's technological, but it's also something that is, able to track behaviors and promote that in an effort to improve that environment that people are, living, working, or shopping in every day.
Yeah, so we've probably see three major areas of quote prop tech, starting to become of sizable interest. So one is in the smart building side. So this is trying to leverage the forever talked about benefits of the Internet of Things and starting to actually connect what was a lot of disparate systems. So the cooling and heating system, now talking to the lighting system, talking to the energy management system, talking to maybe the security operations center, and on and on and on. It doesn't happen easy. It doesn't happen quick, but it is starting to actually work as systems are being replaced, as new properties are being renovated or built. It's an ample opportunity for the industry to continue to push towards. So it won't be a flip a switch, migration curve, but in 10 years, because a lot of buildings, these are expensive systems, these are large capital investments, you'll start to really have some modest smart buildings being retrofitted into legacy venues. The second piece we see is really around traffic measurement and optimization. So there has been an increased amount of insight being able to be delivered through the use of all these different sensors that can be looked on. So, as consumers pass through the spaces that make up physical property, so whether that's convention centers, hotels, airports, shopping centers, stadiums, we can learn an awful lot about where people go, how long they stay there, where they linger, where they don't, how often they come back, all in a very privacy-protected, anonymous way, of course. But there is great insight that as a property owner, you can start to optimize your spaces. You can start to measure the effectiveness of different displays or merchandising or architectural features you put in or amenities and whatnot. And the third place that we think in the, again, quote, this prop tech space that is starting to develop, the tenant communication side. So for many years, at least in the shopping center industry, for example, the ways we communicated with the business entities that call a shopping center home, these are, the tenants, oftentimes the restaurants and retailers, was we would make photocopies of whatever information needed to be disseminated. We'd walk around after hours and shove these photocopies underneath the gates, right, or the doors that were locked for the night. And that's how we communicated back and forth with our tenants.
Right.
Luckily, long gone are those days. So they're starting to have some really rich, I call them, for a lack of a better analogy, a private intranet, right? So community space where knowledge bases can exist, where self-service portals are, where ticketing and help systems might live, where real-time chats, type environments are. Again, really trying to use what, technology can do quite well to bring together all the different parties that make up oftentimes a piece of commercial real estate. So those are the three areas that we've seen and can continue to see adoption and innovation. I'm sure it's plenty more, but those are at least three that have intrigued myself. Over the last, couple of years, and I think we're seeing, by and large, kind of clear adoption in those areas.
I mean, with all of these sort of pillars that you're talking about, I mean, is there something missing? Like, really, what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for something where, like, I wish there was a tech company that just had this down packed that, we would love to work with?
That's a great question. It's probably a good segue for one of the areas that we were hoping to talk about together today around, the future, what's next.
Yeah.
And there is, I think this is kind of part and parcel with, what's interesting and what we hope the future becomes is oftentimes, exactly that, what unmet needs are there and what have we just been waiting for, right? Maybe there's some early signs and demos and trials and, that are kind of half baked. You can see the promise, but they just aren't really there from a true commercialized, product perspective. So yeah, there's a couple areas that we here on at least the shopping center side, see. I think they're applicable to a good number of areas. So the first one is some concept of kind of indoor 3D, whether it's 360 tours, whether it's a street view-like experience. These kind of very, so there's a company called Matterport that's out kind of selling hardware. There's a company called Navis who's also doing something in a similar space. You have some modeling companies that are out there doing very, custom, high-touch, 3D SketchUp models to try to do a similar kind of view. All of them are super interesting in the space of trying to help visualize properties through the most innovative ways they possibly can. Are they scalable? Do they have all the, ways of distributing that content? Are they well hooked into more public ecosystems like Google Maps, Apple Maps, or are they really closed? There's some things left that still be desired, but the core promise of being able to show potentially like a prospective tenant, or even trying to help retain a current tenant in a re-envision space, maybe you're renovating or building a new area of the building. These technologies, we think, probably have they'll have a bigger place than they do today. And right now it's a lot of renderings and CAD drawings, and maybe if you have money, a 3D fly-through that an architect firm might have put together. But on a more everyday in and out process, having a better visualization way of your property from, again, often from that consumer point of view. So that's one that we see hopefully some unmet needs on there. The second one would be similar, but probably more around navigation of AR. So, Google, for example, has done some great early stage works, doing some piloting in their own apps live, I think, today now, showing it at a few of their I/O conferences. But there's still, I think, a huge white space left around how an AR type experience can benefit navigation of all sorts, whether it's public transit, outside, on the street, indoors, inside of a venue, you name it. I think there's some pretty interesting places that can go, and certainly how it opens up a whole host of other content experiences, not just, where to put some arrows and some directional, virtual, signage on the screen, but how all the other areas could be on your screen could be mapped, not in the sense of a north, south, east, west type of map, but mapped in the sense that they could be content areas and planes where different things could be applied or visualized. So, virtual ad space could essentially abound as we look through these AR lenses to the world. So I think AR is an area that I think we'll see a lot more than less, especially around navigation. I think that's going to be a good thing for the end users.
Just on that AR piece, I know we had chatted about it before, and you were very excited about what Snapchat did. I think it was in Chicago on the Bean, the Cloud Gate. There was a way of sort of co-designing this experience with others where you could walk up to it, and I believe you could start doing some graffiti, or you could start marking it up, and then you would walk away, and then someone else who would go and visit that location with that same experience could see what others have done in the past. And so it was this great experience where everyone was involved and co-designing this design, which I believe, last time we talked about that, you were very passionate about one day, potentially there's an AR experience in a mall where it is actually a lot more of the shopper being an author, and that author is able to actually build an environment alongside everyone else who is at that venue.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they may have done it in Chicago. I know for sure it was in New York City in Central Park. They modeled a Jeff Koons shiny, poodle, a dog made out of balloons, one of his kind of quintessential sculptures, and they virtualized that and put that into Central Park. And then I think the very next day, someone came by and virtually graffitied, very New York, right, this virtual piece of public art. And yeah, it is both super exciting and somewhat fear-invoking if you're the owner of, commercial real estate, where in the physical world, you work very hard to control the experience, right? What your building looks like, how it's taken care of. You paid a ton of money to have it architecturally built just to your spec, and you have, such a huge overhead of maintaining it. To have someone come in, whether it's every plain Joe, person, and be able to virtually graffiti your building in ways that you didn't want or didn't authorize, is quite fear-evoking, in some sense, that we might lose control of it if it goes the wrong way. I don't want to say we need to overexert control. I don't believe that, that the creative side of the humans need to be solely controlled by business owners who happen to own real estate. But there has to be a balance where, the type of content and experience that's left behind, that symbolizing and overriding the physical world, that's a tricky place to be. So there's even some early stage companies trying to manage digital virtual rights. So what actually can be applied to your building. Don't know if I agree with it, but it's just a really intriguing area of kind of the consequences of that AR/VR has.
Right. And actually, I want to unpack that a little bit because, one of the things that as this entire industry is evolving more and more as it relates to physical spaces, I mean, you mentioned one thing that now is building out legislation around it, but even, from my perspective, I'm seeing more and more like out of Europe and even the States, like legislation being passed in California and, across the entire country that is limiting the use of obviously consumer data and being able to actually track, how people are behaving in spaces. I wonder, I'm all for making sure that, we're not living in a big brother state and surveillance, but I'm also very aware from like as a data person that, there are things getting missed now and data not being collected because of the inability to be allowed to do these things. And I think ultimately, with the best intentions, organizations are now limited in the way that they can build experiences because they're not getting a full picture of how people are interacting with it. I think, I'd love to hear your opinion on the matter and like how you see the limitations on what you can collect versus, potentially what would be great if it was opened up a little bit so you could actually start knowing how people were interacting with certain things.
For sure. So I get the privilege of wearing the data protection office, the DPO, for the company I work for. And I think companies have to ask themselves three things. What can you collect? What should you collect? And what legally, can you collect? Those very well may be three different things, right? Technology may enable way more data to be collected. The laws, maybe you can collect, to a midpoint, but maybe you want to take a higher road, right? And you do want a more privacy first consumer. Maybe you choose to not even go all the way as far as what legally is able to be collected. You have some decisions. It's really in the make. So we think, more is more regulation and less good or bad. Probably good. It's a nationwide clear standards here in the United States would go a long ways versus having each state legislator on their own trying to fix this problem. That would make it simpler and easier to operate in. One of our business partners, Foursquare, the CEO, really smart guy named Jeff Gluck, just wrote a brilliant, very well-articulated article in the New York Times as an opinion piece on what type of regulation that he, and I guess somewhat representing what Foursquare believes in. It's well articulated, and I can get my head and get back behind it to a great extent. So that'd be one kind of link we could put up as a resource for folks, to kind of say, where should regulation go in a healthy way versus this kind of hodgepodge approach that we're in today, which is anything but easy or helpful. But back to what we should be collecting. Can collect, can legally collect, ethically, morally collect. I mean, there's a lot of questions. If it's done, simple things of if you're collecting it, you're telling the shopper or the consumer, right? If you are telling them, you're giving them some control over opting in, opting out, or controlling what you store, how you store it. So it's not hidden and it's not without control. So those two simple things we think go a long ways. May not be the perfect simple answer, but it oftentimes gets you to at least a much healthier starting place of be transparent and give full if you can, but as much control, joint control really, because it's a trade, right? Oftentimes the consumer is interacting with your platform, they're getting value out, but they're leaving data behind it. You find valuable. It's this nice dance. Both partners in that dance need to have some ability to control their own destiny. So it's not a one-sided and either way place. I think is where we need to land.
I think the biggest piece is the overcorrection of legislation that is potentially going a little bit too far sometimes, in that even things like anonymous video analytics on directories to capture people's demographics. At the end of the day, like things like anonymous video analytics ultimately is trying to provide a better experience, because what you're really tracking is, how many like demographics, if I'm catering more to a younger audience, what kind of tenants do I need in my asset? And then making sure that you do have that data to share without, too much coming into play where now you're limited by what you can actually collect, and now you're just sort of guessing some of the data.
Yeah, that's a great example of one of the stickier ones where you have, can you really opt out? Is asking someone to not come into a venue an effective opt-out, if they don't want to be analyzed? I don't know if it really is. If you have to submit a picture of your face, to have it not be recognized, is that kind of it's like a circular argument? You want more privacy, but you're actually having to supply a very personal piece of information, a high-res photo of your face for them to store and to maintain as, if you see this image, don't store it, don't analyze it. That's sort of crazy, circular reasoning there. So where does that data go? Does it, live on the device edge? Does it go to a cloud? Does it get stored? Can they replay it, or is it just analyzed and dumped? Big things that would matter. Again, from the venue side, it can be really powerfully helpful data that if done right and protected well, and not stored and not and anonymized and whatnot, could be really interesting. But we've seen big companies who have unlimited data storage store it all. They want to feed it back to machine algorithms later. What about government interference, right? Crimes certainly happen in public venues of all shapes and sizes all the time. And you start to think of, government, even if they have warrants and legitimate uses, so that it gets so sticky. It's a fascinating conversation that I don't think we've settled as industries, or certainly as government regulators on it for this particular space. So it's intriguing space for sure. The balance probably hasn't been set. This is back to, we can do things. Should we do things? How do we do things? That are useful for the business but still protective and respectful of the consumer who's being analyzed. Whether they knew it or wanted it or could opt out of it, are all great questions we have to ask.
Right. And I think the pursuit is one that is noble in that, understanding the philosophy of a mall, that it is a community hub. I did a lot of reading on, why were malls invented in the first place? And they were community hubs for people to come together in metropolitan areas. There wasn't really that location where everyone could congregate. And, that was the mall. And I think, over the years, shopping and retail as part of that community hub has been dominant. But now we're seeing, other things definitely, it's a huge trend right now, putting gyms inside of shopping centers, putting, co-working spaces, putting living environments. Hudson Yards is obviously a great amalgamation of retail, shopping, living, and even art with the vessel at the front of it. As curators and, as yourself curating this environment and going back to those real core principles of what is a mall and how are you treating it, I wonder that, what is the balance between, all of these different pieces and maintaining those principles of a mall, but also trying to obviously not miss out on the fact that people are also shopping online. How do you see, that dynamic between all these moving pieces?
Yeah, definitely agree, Zoran, first and foremost on the community side, where across industries, I think you can see a powerful phenomenon for a much more discovery-driven experience. I'll use the restaurant industry. I think the mass chain restaurants, nothing against these brands, they've actually done a phenomenal job to reinvent in themselves and to become re-relevant. But the classic, Applebee's or Chili's or these Red Lobster, Olive Garden were highly popular for a while. And I think that homogenized, very chain-driven experience that was in the dining industry was 100% at play in a mall. Regardless of who owned the mall and on where that mall was located, the relative mix of stores in, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was relatively the same. You could guarantee there was a Gap, a Victoria's Secret, a Champs, a Foot Locker, the same stores. And by and large, right, just like in the food world where we all now crave what's very unique and local and curated and, whether they're owned by chains, but they're still more run as boutiques, and same thing for hotels and down the list. Malls are the same way, right? So it is absolutely a much more discovery, community, local, whenever we possibly can experience. And that is definitely the ongoing direction where you'll still have some core stalwart, brands that are there because, they're just that, right? They're expected, they're foundational, but the newest and coolest, things you want to be something interesting that you've never seen around a corner. Who doesn't want that experience, right? I've never seen that. Let's go check that out. That's a powerful thing, right? That it's inherent to why a lot of us travel or go to open air marketplaces or city markets, right? Or even the farmers market. It's just what's new, what's interesting, what haven't you got to experience yet? Malls are not immune to that, and further, we want to be part of that in our, riding that trend. In regards to more the omni-channel side, it is a similar thing where, the same retailers who are in a mall who are increasingly becoming highly skilled operators of an omni-channel set of buying and picking and returning in this mix and match world that they live in, with the consumer being in full control of many ways of acquiring, purchasing, and returning and shipping goods. The mall is again, it is part of that same ecosystem. Fundamentally, we believe and have empirically seen that it is a huge value creator for real estate, for physical venues and locations that are part of that ecosystem. Because a lot of the mix and match omnichannel scenarios often involve a store at some place in that value stream, whether it's buy online but pick up in store, whether it's buy online but it's shipped from stores acting like mini micro-sized DC spread across the country to reduce on shipping cost, speed on delivery timelines to customers, whether it's bottom line and return to store. I mean, the list goes on and on. That store is fundamental in enabling many of these scenarios. So that's super exciting. I think if you're in that piece, it's not to be feared. It's a flame to be fanned, as long as there are the right measurements and agreements in place for capturing and valuing what that store's producing. Sometimes it's more than just a sale, right? It's an enabler. Not just a cash register, but fundamentally, any and all ways that a store can be part of a value stream to a consumer is a good thing for the industry that I'm part of, the shopping center industry. So we're excited to only push more and more things, whether it's early stage pilots, innovative companies, whether it's investments we make ourselves, into bringing, like you're saying, the shoppremiumoutlets.com site to life, and now in partnership with the Rue Gilt Group, and trying to make it even bigger, faster. There's just endless opportunities to really drive value out of that thematic area of how can this real estate be more productive for us as the owner, productive for the retailers, and more convenient and useful for the consumers who ultimately are the mutual end users that we're here to serve. There's a lot of opportunities still. So I think of all the innovation areas, you're going to see a ton around logistics, around delivery, around other omni-channel scenarios. So that's going to be definitely a place where more than less is going to be happening.
Right.
Maybe two other real quick ones, for the future casting, navel gazing. So we'll get a good laugh, in 5 years. Whoever listens back to this, I think bots of all shapes and sizes will have have a lot of lifespan left. So whether it's in traditional messaging services like, WeChat or Facebook Messenger or Line, whether it's newer places like some of the other large, top 5 tech companies, I can't name, but they're doing some amazing work on some bot areas to offload more questions and answers in customer service areas, whether it's voice assistants and training them for very specific sets of knowledge and skills. All of these, and probably even more, even on your own website, proprietary bots that are doing customer service, whatnot. There is a huge headroom where we're going to see a lot more as natural language processing finally got to a place where it can really do great parsing and intent understanding. Multi-language processing is going to be a next big wave where, regardless of what language someone interacts with you, even if you don't have content that inherently is sitting in that matched language, we could potentially retranslate on the fly back to you. Whether it's big data, trying to sort the best answer, we have multiple answers, but trying to understand the best answer for that exact context is going to be really exciting. So bots going to have a big day. And then super, obvious one, but I think it finally is the year of practical use of big data, maybe less of deep neural cognitive, blah, blah, blah. Yes, the big companies sure are probably doing some amazing stuff, but from a practicality of average companies with, maybe a data team of 5 people or less, so not 2,000 scientists working on this. There's some great tooling now available. There's some practical, maybe they're more in the crawl and walk stages, not the run and sprint, but they're viable ways of making some great starts with figuring out what these data sets can produce, even whatever your industry is. So whether it's least spread optimizations or whether it's tenant mix or predicting outcomes of who is going to be the most likely tenant to succeed. That may not be who pays us the most, but who's most likely to succeed. I mean, all these different ways of doing different models and scenarios. Really fascinating stuff. It's not, in the sense of it's not going to win, a Nobel Award. But it will drive huge value by applying some real data rigor to data sets you have, building models, analysis tools, and just getting some practical learnings out of that. So that's what's exciting today. I think that then once you start doing that, it's very natural to do more and more and more, and that those teams and data sets and tools will only grow.
Well, yeah, because of all the things you just listed around making sure that the personalized experience as well of a retail environment is always still, resting on the fact that you want to create a great experience for the people who visit. Perfect. So actually, you might have thought you got away with it, but I did have one big question on my paper here. Is what is the genesis of NARPOL?
Oh boy. Off the record, I'll tell you certainly, but it takes a few beers.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much again, Patrick. This was really, really insightful. Obviously, I think anyone who listens to you talk for more than 5 minutes knows that you're incredibly intelligent when it comes to all things digital and retail, and just the way that you think very uniquely about the problems at hand, and just even at a macro level, the trends that are going on right now. So yeah, thank you very much for being our guest here today. And
it's my pleasure, Zoran. Yeah, thanks. Again, we're all learning it together. We're making it up every day. And I think that's the fun part of being in this space is, there's the expertise that we all have. We've learned from our past work, and it's instantly outdated, every day. So it's what do we together, work together and build, and learn, from that point forward. So yeah, it's exciting, and thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.